Salvation Story, the unfolding drama of God's heart. Introduction. Welcome, dear reader, to the most magnificent story ever told. Set aside all preconceptions and allow yourself to be swept away by a narrative that spans millennia, touches every corner of human experience, and reveals the very heart of God. This is not merely a history book or a collection of moral tales, it is the grand, unfolding drama of redemption, a story of broken promises, divine patience, and ultimate love that refuses to let go. If you have never opened the Bible, this story is especially for you. If you have read it countless times, prepare to see it with fresh eyes. We will journey together through 12 magnificent periods that form the backbone of salvation history. Our path will be guided by the narrative accounts, enriched by the poetry and prophecy, and anchored by 6 unbreakable, sacred promises called covenants. These covenants are the golden threads that weave the entire story together, binding God to His people and His people to Him. They reveal a God who initiates relationship, who remains faithful even when humanity is faithless, and who relentlessly pursues restoration. As we traverse this landscape, you will encounter kings and peasants, prophets and priests, heroes and villains. You will witness miracles that defy nature and listen to words that have shaped civilizations. Most importantly, you will discover how your own story fits into this greater narrative, a story that invites you to become part of its continuing chapter. So, let us begin this journey together, through the pages of the most remarkable book ever written, as we uncover the salvation story using the Bible's own timeline format. Chapter 1, The Early World, Genesis 1-11. The original harmony and the shattering dissonance. Our story opens not with a bang or a whimper, but with the deliberate, joyful act of a transcendent creator bringing order from chaos. In the beginning, God spoke, and worlds burst into existence. The narrative, contained within the first 11 chapters of Genesis, paints a picture of perfect, crystalline harmony. Imagine it, light-piercing darkness, waters gathering below, skies stretching above. Vegetation carpeting the earth in a tapestry of green, punctuated by flowers of every hue and fragrance. The sun, moon, and stars hung like celestial jewelry in the vast expanse. Creatures of sea, air, and land moved in perfect rhythm with their Creator's design. The pinnacle of this magnificent creation was humanity, formed not by word alone but by the intimate touch of the divine. God took dust from the ground, breathed life into it, and fashioned man and woman in His own image, the Imago Dei. This was no small distinction. To bear God's image meant to reflect His character, to exercise dominion as His representatives, to live in unbroken communion with Him. Adam and Eve were placed in the lush Garden of Eden, a paradise where they walked with God in the cool of the day, tending creation and enjoying perfect relationship with each other and with their Maker. This beautiful order was governed by the first sacred promise, the Adamic covenant. This covenant was breathtaking in its simplicity yet absolute in its nature. God placed Adam and Eve in the garden with but one restriction: you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The terms were clear: obedience would yield perpetual communion with God and eternal life, disobedience would bring certain death. This covenant established the fundamental principle that would echo throughout salvation history: blessing follows obedience, while disobedience leads to brokenness and death. But then, the atmosphere shifted. The ancient enemy, embodied by a serpent, slithered into paradise and whispered doubt into the ear of the woman: did God really say? With these words, the serpent challenged God's goodness, His truthfulness, and His authority. The woman considered the fruit, saw that it was pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom, and took some and ate it. She gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it too. This choice, known forever as the fall, was not merely a misstep, it was a cosmic catastrophe that reverberated through creation. In that moment, sin entered the beautiful world, and with it came death, suffering, and separation from God. The perfect communion was shattered, and the Adamic covenant was broken. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Adam and Eve's eyes were opened, and they realized they were naked. Shame filled their hearts, and they hid from God among the trees. When God confronted them, the blame game began. Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the serpent. But God held all accountable, pronouncing judgments that would affect all of creation. The serpent would crawl on its belly and face enmity with humanity, the woman would experience pain in childbirth, the man would toil and sweat for his food, and all would face physical death. Then, in an act of both justice and mercy, God banished them from the garden, placing cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life, lest they eat from it and live forever in their fallen state. The human story could have ended there, in silence and despair. But in one of the most pivotal moments in history, God intervened with an immediate declaration of grace, a promise in the midst of the curse. This is the Proto-Evangelium, the first gospel, pronounced in Genesis 3 verse 15, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers, he will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This was a declaration of war against the forces of evil, but also a promise of hope. God pledged that a descendant of the woman, known as the seed, would one day crush the head of the serpent, though the serpent would bruise his heel. This moment is the first divine promise of a future Redeemer, the first key event in the plan of salvation, a glimmer of light in the gathering darkness. The initial fracture deepened as Adam and Eve's first children entered the world. Outside the garden, the first sin of the human heart bore violent fruit when Cain, driven by jealousy, murdered his brother Abel. God confronted Cain, saying, "What have you done? Listen. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain was marked and sent away to wander the earth, demonstrating how rapidly corruption spreads in a fallen world. Yet even in judgment, God showed mercy, placing a mark on Cain to protect him from being killed by others. As generations passed, humanity multiplied, but so did sin. The genealogies of Genesis trace this descent into wickedness, with each generation seemingly falling further from God's original design. By the time of Noah, the situation had become dire. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. God was grieved that he had made human beings, and his heart was filled with pain. This led to the severe, definitive judgment of the Great Flood. God instructed Noah, a righteous man who walked faithfully with God, to build an enormous ark, a vessel of salvation in the midst of coming judgment. For 120 years, Noah preached righteousness and built the ark, while the world continued in its wickedness. When the time came, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives entered the ark, along with pairs of every kind of animal. Then God closed the door, and the fountains of the deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. For 40 days and 40 nights, rain fell on the earth, and every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out, except for those in the ark. But even here, grace persisted. After the waters receded and Noah's family emerged onto the cleansed earth, God established a new, grand promise, the Noahic covenant. This promise, recorded in Genesis 9 verses 9 to 11, was unconditional and universal. "I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you, and never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood, never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." The enduring symbol of this promise is the rainbow, a sign of common grace extended to all humanity. Whenever rain clouds appear and the rainbow arcs across the sky, it serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness to preserve his creation. Yet, man's pride was not so easily subdued. The generation that followed sought to secure their own destiny and fame by building a structure that reached to the heavens, the Tower of Babel. "Come, let us build ourselves a city, with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves," they said. This was not merely an architectural project, it was an act of rebellion against God's command to fill the earth and subdue it. Instead of spreading out as God had instructed, they gathered together to make a name for themselves, attempting to reach heaven on their own terms. God responded by confusing their language so that they could not understand one another. Unable to communicate, the people scattered across the face of the earth, and the city was left unfinished. This event, known as the confusion of languages at Babel, explains the origin of different nations and languages, and it demonstrates humanity's continued resistance to God's authority. Yet even in judgment, God was setting the stage for his redemptive plan, scattering the nation so that his blessing to Abraham might eventually flow to all peoples. Thus concludes the first chapter of our story, a tale of creation and fall, judgment and grace, scattering and promise. The world is broken, but not abandoned. The covenant is broken, but not forgotten. And in the midst of human rebellion, God has already begun to unveil his plan for redemption, a plan that will unfold through the lives of individuals and nations who will become the bearers of his promise to a broken world.